Tonight, this talk is, again, basically my conversion story, which chronicles my faith journey over the last 45 years. And I know what many of you are probably thinking. He doesn't look a day over 27. Anyway, my faith journey, growing up Catholic, leaving the church, coming back to the church, and then finally growing up as a Catholic. What I want to do to start this talk off is to give you a word. And I'm not sure how many of you might be familiar with the charismatic renewal and what they mean by getting a word, but that's not the sense I'm using it. I'm using it rather in the sense it was used in the movie The Graduate. Anybody remember that movie? The scene in the movie that I remember, I think the only scene that I remember in the movie, is Dustin Hoffman's playing a recent college graduate. He's got some rich parents who are throwing him a big graduation party, and this friend of his father's comes up to him, puts his arm around Dustin. I think he's got a drink in a hand and a cigar in the other hand, and he points in Dustin's face. He says, "I want to give you a word, just one word." He says, "Plastics." Plastics? Basically, this guy was telling Dustin that if you get into plastics, you can make an impact in this world, and you're gonna do good things for yourself if you get into plastics. Well, I want to give you a word tonight, just one word: apologetics. If you get into apologetics, if you learn and then teach apologetics, you can have an impact in this world. In fact, if you get into apologetics, if you make apologetics a part of what you teach, you can have an impact in the world to come as well. Apologetics, if you're not familiar with the word, apologetics is simply learning about how to explain and defend your faith. An apologia in ancient Greek times was the case a lawyer would make on behalf of his client. So basically, for apologetics, for us, it's the case that we can make, the case we can build for our faith as Catholics. This is my conversion story, but it is in many ways a testament to the power of apologetics. All the way through this talk, you will see the role played by apologetics or the lack of apologetics in my life. Now, I don't know how into apologetics each of you are. I know Father Norm is into it big. Obviously, some of you more than others. But what I want to do is share my experience with you and hopefully show you what a valuable tool apologetics can be in evangelization. And I'm not just talking about apologetics as a valuable tool in the evangelization of non-Catholics. I'm talking about apologetics first and foremost as a valuable tool in the evangelization of Catholics. Apologetics as a valuable tool in the evangelization, education, and formation of Catholics. My faith journey is similar in many ways to that of many other Catholics. I was born into a Catholic family, Polish on my mom's side, Italian on my dad's side. Can't get much more Catholic than that, unless somehow I had an Irish grandmother. I was baptized when I was a month or two old. In the second grade, I had my first confession, then received First Communion. I was confirmed in the fourth grade at age 10. After my confirmation, I learned little, if anything, about my faith. So I went to Catholic school in first grade and then public school after that, so I had to attend the weekly CCD classes at the church, or religious education classes, because I was going to public school. After I was confirmed, again in the fourth grade at age 10, the only thing I can remember about my CCD classes was that each and every year I would beg my mother not to make me go again this year. She finally caved in and stopped making me go when I was in the 9th grade. But in the 10th grade, I had a next-door neighbor who I hung out with quite a bit. His name was Greg. He was a Catholic, although his family didn't go to church very often. This guy had gotten involved at the high school with a group called Young Life. Do you have that up here? Familiar with it? Basically, Young Life is an evangelical high school youth group, and it met in the public high schools. He had gotten very involved with this group. Now, I remember him asking me once whether I knew that if I died at that very moment, if I knew that with absolute assurance that I was going to heaven, which is an evangelical test for you to see whether or not you're a Christian, depending on how you answer that question. Did I have absolute assurance that if I died at that moment, I would go to heaven. Well, my response to him was, I didn't have much theology in me, but I said, well, I'm not the one who decides if I go to heaven or not. God is. So, no, I don't have absolute assurance that I'm going to heaven if I died right now. Well, he then told me, he said to me straight to my face, he said, that meant I wasn't a Christian because I did not have absolute assurance of my salvation at that moment. He then proceeded to tell me straight out that he was better than me because he was a Christian and I wasn't. All I can remember thinking was, well, if he's a Christian, and that's what a Christian is, then I don't want to be one. So here I was at age 16, an age of uncertainty, an idealistic age, an age where you start thinking about questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What is life about? What is the purpose? Start thinking about all these questions. Here I was completely unarmed, completely unprepared to mount even the simplest defense of my Catholic faith. Yet my Catholic faith, such as it was being challenged. I needed apologetics at age 16. My friend, who later left the faith altogether and is now Baptist, needed apologetics. If either of us had received just fundamental training in apologetics, either from the pulpit or the religion classes, would I have left the faith for over 13 years before coming back? And would he now be Baptist? Can't really say for sure, but it's a question to ponder. What are we teaching our kids in the religious education classes? Are we including apologetics, teaching them how to defend the faith, answer questions about the faith? I don't know how it is here, but in Alabama we need to start doing that in 6th grade, 7th grade at the latest, because our kids are getting hit by the Baptists, the evangelicals, questions about their faith as early as 6th grade, and definitely by 7th grade. I graduated high school in 1976, went off to college at the University of Alabama, and for all intents and purposes left the faith the moment I stepped onto the college campus. I did not come back to the church for 13 years until I was about to leave another college campus, as I'll get into in a minute. I received a bachelor's degree in corporate finance, went straight through to get my MBA, and then went to work as a cost analyst for a defense contractor in Huntsville, Alabama, which is where I'm from originally. After starting work full-time, I bought my dream car, a 1979 black Corvette, glass T-tops, customized stereo system, front and rear spoilers, the whole works. I bought a nice house. I was single, living the good life, investing in the stock market. I was playing the futures markets. I had more money than I knew what to do with. I had dates every weekend and quite often during the week. The weekend for me quite often started on Wednesday night. There were even 2 young ladies during this time who wanted to marry me. Again, I know what you're thinking. Only 2? In other words, on the outside, I was successful. By the world standards, I was very successful. But there was this hole inside of me. A dark, empty hole. And no matter how much money I made, no matter how many things I bought, no matter how many stocks I invested in, no matter how many parties I went to, no matter how many dates I had, this black hole inside of me just kept growing. I felt empty. I felt absolutely alone. There were many nights during this period in my life, my mid to late 20s, where I literally cried myself to sleep. I was in such, not physical, but emotional pain. And I would just ask God to just take me. Just take my life. Take me in my sleep. I do not want to wake up in the morning. Just don't let me wake up in the morning. And I meant it. I did not want to live anymore. Those prayers were some of the most fervent prayers and heartfelt prayers I have ever prayed in my life, even to this day. And you know what? It's a funny thing about God. He answered my prayers. He did take me. He did take my life. Just not in the way that I meant for Him to. You see, somewhere in that 5 or 6 year period of my life where on the outside everything seemed great, but on the inside everything was a mess, everything was dark, Somewhere during that time, I received a couple of different things in the mail. 2 small pieces of mail that eventually led to some major changes in my life. One was a fundraising letter from an organization called Covenant House. You may be familiar with that since they're headquartered in New York. It's a ministry to runaway kids, throwaway kids, living on the street. That letter really touched me, and I started donating money to Covenant House on a regular basis. And, it was something funny, too. As soon as I sent a check into Covenant House, all of a sudden I started receiving fundraising letters from a whole bunch of people. I don't know how that happens. Anyway, I started supporting a few other ministries other than Covenant House as well. But they all had one thing in common. They were all ministries to the poor, to those who were underprivileged in some way or another. So God was taking my life, but in the sense that I was developing a deep affinity for the poor and a deep desire to do something about their plight, which led to a new way of thinking about my desire for material possessions. And if you want to understand what a mighty work God was doing in my life, one of the outgrowths of all this, one of the outgrowths of this new way of thinking about material possessions, was that I traded in my dream car, my Corvette. And I traded it in for a Chevy Sprint, which if any of you know about cars, you know that God was doing a mighty, mighty work. The other thing I received in the mail during this time was a little pamphlet from this guy named Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. Anybody ever heard of Dr. Peale? The Power of Positive Thinking. Dr. Peale was a minister in some Protestant denomination. I don't know which one. But he had written this pamphlet that came to me in the mail, which was called The Power of Positive Thinking. I was really taken with that pamphlet. So much so that I went out and bought the book by the same title, The Power of Positive Thinking. And somewhere in that pamphlet and in the book, Dr. Peale suggested you read one chapter of the New Testament each day. Just read one chapter a day until you can get through the whole New Testament. So I did. I went through the New Testament twice, reading one chapter a day. God, again, was taking my life. He was answering my prayers. He had established a beachhead in my soul, although I didn't realize it at the time. All of these things that were going on in my life led me to realize that something needed to change. I wasn't happy. I had this emptiness inside of me, but I wasn't yet to the point of realizing that something inside of me needed to change. I thought that I could be happy if I could just change my external circumstances. So I quit my job in the defense industry and went back to school. I enrolled in the PhD program at the University of North Carolina. I was going to get a PhD in finance, and I was going to become a university professor, a cush job, making lots of money. That would make me happy. That would fill the void. But a funny thing happened when I got to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The very first day I walked onto the North Carolina campus, the very first day, I was assigned an office. All the first-year PhD students in the business school were assigned to the same office. It's this huge room they called the bullpen. In it were a bunch of old, heavy oak desks and these old 10-foot-high bookshelves. For my office, I picked out a desk which was backed up against one of these bookshelves. Well, on this particular bookshelf that my desk, my office was backed up against, were dozens of economics books, finance books, statistics books, all these, hardback books that previous PhD students had left behind from their classes. I stood up on the desk, started going through all of them, see if there might be a book or two there that would help me in my classes, which were going to be starting in about a week. Went through all the shelves, picking out a book here and there. Got down, my desk was blocking the bottom two shelves. Couldn't see what was on them. So I put the shoulder to it and moved it out, and this was a heavy desk. I was able to move it out a couple feet. On the bottom two shelves, they were covered with dust. And on the very bottom shelf was the one book that was on only one book on those two shelves. So on the very bottom, almost right in the middle, covered with dust, was a little thin paperback book. Picked it up, dusted it off, and my life changed. You see, as I said, all the other books on these shelves were these big, thick, hardback books, textbooks, finance, economics, statistics, but not this book. This was a relatively thin paperback book entitled The Normal Christian Life. It was written by a Chinese preacher named Watchman Nee. I think he was Methodist. It was as if that book had been planted there years ago just for me. This book had laid hidden on this very bottom shelf, covered with dust, waiting for me to find it for who knows how long. The whole book was on the letter of Paul to the Romans. I'd never seen a book like that before. I didn't know books like that existed. Imagine a whole book on just one book of the Bible. You can't write a whole book on just one book of the Bible, can you? Not enough material. Little did I know. Anyway, I read this book in just a day or two and wondered if there might be more books like that one. So I went down to the campus bookstore, which was a very well-stocked bookstore, and I came across a book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. After reading Mere Christianity, I was hooked. Mere Christianity is essentially a book of Christian apologetics, a book to explain the Christian faith. That book did it. After reading Mere Christianity, again, I was hooked. This book, which gave a reasoned explanation of why one should be a Christian, again, Christian apologetics, this book was key in my eventual return to the church. After reading Mere Christianity, I went back down to the bookstore and stumbled across some more C.S. Lewis books. Bought several more C.S. Lewis books. Finally got tired of C.S. Lewis and said, I've got to find something else. So then I stumbled across this little book called The Confessions. Some guy named St. Augustine or something like that. You might have heard of him. After that, I read The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. Then I got into Fulton Sheen, then St. Francis de Sales, and on it went. I read more books on Christianity that year than I did on finance and economics, which is one reason I left the PhD program after that first year. I decided the PhD program wasn't what I was looking for, but I still wasn't sure what I was looking for. So I took a position as a finance instructor at a small school in Alabama, the University of North Alabama. But 1 week before I left Chapel Hill to take that position at North Alabama, the culmination of all that reading I'd been doing was that I finally came back to the church after 13 years, going to confession to the priest on campus for the first time in probably 15 to 17 years. No one evangelized me back into the church. No one witnessed to me. But it was apologetics that brought me back. Apologetics in conjunction with prayer. My dad's prayers for me. I found out later that my dad, God rest his soul, had been going to Eucharistic adoration at his parish during this time that I was away from the church. He did an hour of adoration one morning a week from 4 to 5 a.m. I think it was every Monday morning, for several years. One of his prayer intentions was that his kids, all 6 of whom had left the church, would come back to the church. My father essentially prayed me back into the church. I believe my father's prayers set in motion a chain of grace that put me in touch with Watchman Nee and C.S. Lewis and St. Augustine and all the others who led me back to the church. So for those of you, if you do have family members who've left the church, keep praying. Don't give up hope. St. Monica prayed for St. Augustine for 30 years before it finally got through his thick skull. Anyway, I moved back to Alabama and started my teaching job at the University of North Alabama. My class schedule was such that I was able to make it to daily Mass. And being single at the time, I was able to get very involved at the church. So here I was, this good Catholic, very involved at his parish, a daily communicant. Yet there was something wrong. There was something wrong. What was wrong was that I didn't believe all the things that the church was teaching. What's wrong with contraception, I thought? What's wrong with sex outside of marriage as long as you're in love, I thought? What's wrong with women priests? Who cares if non-Catholics receive communion? Who's this old guy in Rome trying to tell me how to live my life? Who is he to me? What does he know about me? I needed instruction in my faith. But I was so ignorant of my faith that I didn't even know that I was ignorant. That's how ignorant I was. I thought I was being a very good Catholic. I taught for 1 year at the university and realized that a teaching career was not what I was looking for. So I spent the better part of the next year volunteering at Covenant House. That fundraising letter I spoke of earlier led not just to me supporting Covenant House financially, but with me looking at Covenant House as a possible career. They had a lay community associated with Covenant House, which I became a part of. You lived in community and worked at Covenant House. We received room and board and I think something like $12 a week stipend. I wanted to work for Covenant House for several years and then possibly hook up with Catholic Relief Services and go serve the poorest of the poor all over the world. So I signed up with Covenant House and got sent to work in their center in Anchorage, Alaska. They had 12 centers you could work at in the United States and Canada at that time. Anchorage was my 12th choice. Oh well. Anyway, I spent 8 months in Anchorage working with Covenant House, and then in the middle of December, when it was minus 20 degrees, with a minus 90 wind chill, and I was having to walk a mile into work in the morning in the north wind, I realized that a boy from Alabama had no business being in Alaska in the middle of December. So I decided to head for a warmer climate, and I took off for Guatemala. Covenant House had a center in Guatemala City. My intent was to spend a few months learning Spanish at one of those intensive language Spanish schools, and then go to work for Covenant House in Guatemala City. I lasted all of 2 months in Guatemala. Just as I was starting to get good in Spanish, I got some bacteria inside of me, some very unfriendly bacteria. Lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks and had to come home to the States for medical treatment. That temporarily ended my career of working directly for and with the poor. However, I did realize from my experiences in Alaska and Guatemala that maybe I shouldn't stray too far from Alabama. After getting treatment in Huntsville, I ended up about a month later in Birmingham, where I landed a job as an investment analyst with a bank. That was the spring of 1991. And at the bank, and at the parish I joined, I kept getting put into situations where people were asking me about the Catholic faith. I don't know why. I wasn't a particularly, I wasn't an outgoing, hey, come see Jesus at the Catholic Church. I wasn't doing any of that. But everybody kept asking me questions about the Catholic faith. Sometimes I could give answers, but most of the time I couldn't. So one day I went down to the Catholic bookstore in town, and I asked them, I went in and I said, do you have a book, a tape, something? This was a few years before the Catechism had come out. Something, anything that will explain the Catholic faith to me. Why do we do what we do? Why do we believe what we believe? Well, turned out the woman working there that day was just a volunteer, and she wasn't all that familiar with the books in the store. She said she didn't really know if they had a book like that. So she just started looking around the bookstore and on the bookshelves, and then she came to one of the tape racks. And she saw a particular tape, cassette tape, that she grabbed and handed to me. She said that she had not heard the tape herself, but that several people she knew had said good things about it. So I bought it. Little did I know. It turns out that this was Dr. Scott Hahn's conversion tape. If you're not familiar with him, if you've never heard of him, you've got to. This man is incredible. Incredible. He was a former Protestant minister in the Presbyterian Church of America, one of their rising stars, biblical scholar. Here was his conversion tape to Catholicism. When I listened to that tape, it was like throwing gasoline on a smoldering ember. Here was a man, a former Protestant minister, who was using the Bible for crying out loud, to explain why he came into the Catholic faith. Imagine that. Explaining the Catholic faith with the Bible. What a novel idea. I started buying all the Scott Hahn tapes I could get my hands on. I started learning how to explain and defend my faith. I started learning apologetics. I started learning the Bible. I started buying other people's apologetics tapes as well. I started buying apologetics books from the bookstore, through Ignatius Press, and through just about anywhere else I could find them. I started reading the Bible in earnest, with a new outlook on what exactly this book was and what exactly it meant to me as a Catholic. I learned for the first time not just what my church teaches, but why. Through apologetics, I learned about the Bible, the Mass, the sacraments, and much, much more. As I learned how to defend my faith through all of these apologetics resources, I was necessarily learning my faith. You cannot learn to defend your faith, which is what apologetics is all about, without at the very same time learning your faith. I now understood why the church teaches that contraception is intrinsically evil. I now understood why sex outside of marriage is wrong. I now understood why women cannot be priests. I now understood why Protestants cannot receive communion in the Catholic Church. I now understood why the role of the Holy Father is so important. And I now understood the Pope's relationship to me. And I understood a whole lot of other things much, much better as well. I learned about my faith truly for the first time in my life. And everything I learned just made me want to learn more. And this knowledge helped me to strive to change my life. Not on the outside this time, but on the inside. To conform my will to what my intellect was bringing to the table. To conform my beliefs to the church's teachings rather than trying to conform the church's teachings to my beliefs. For me, apologetics was the key to truly becoming Catholic. The key to learning about my faith. The key to learning about the Bible. The key to a deeper prayer life. And that's why I wanted to give you that word tonight, apologetics, because of the difference that apologetics has made in my life, in my faith life, in my prayer life. And not just in my life, but the difference that I've seen it make in the lives of people all over the country. Now, that is not to say that apologetics is the be-all and end-all. It's not. As I just said, apologetics is a tool that we can use in evangelization, a tool that we can use to educate people. It is a key. It's a key which can open the door to a lot of other things. And again, it is a very good tool to use when evangelizing Catholic and non-Catholic alike. A tool you can use to educate yourself, your family, your co-workers, your friends, your fellow parishioners, and the list goes on. Now, roll the tape forward a few years, couple of years. Here I was, going along for a couple of years, minding my own business, learning my faith, learning apologetics, learning how to explain and defend the faith, although really not using it much more than answering a few questions at work or at the parish. When in July of 1993, I was at a pro-life rally at a church in Birmingham, and I heard about this prayer group of mostly single Catholics that got together every Thursday night. In spite of my natural inclination, which was not to go somewhere where I knew absolutely no one. You may not believe this, but I'm actually a very shy person. Anyway, I overcame my initial inclination, and I went to check out this group one Thursday night. I walked in the door of this home where the prayer group was being held that Thursday, and I immediately thought to myself, John, you are an idiot. Why have you done this to yourself? There are about 40 people there, and I had to push people aside almost to open the door, but I didn't know anybody. I was out of my element, and I said, why did I do this to myself? I don't know any of these people. This is going to be dreadful. But then I turned to my right and looked into the living room of this house, and sitting on this couch was this beautiful young woman. And I had just thought, John, you idiot, why are you doing this? You shouldn't have come here. This is a mistake. I have come to the right place. All those negative thoughts that were going through my head were all of a sudden gone. And I remember it as clearly as yesterday. The young woman's name was Janelle, and we were married about a year and a half later. And how blessed I am by this gift of God. I cannot begin to explain the many ways in which this apostolate of mine, the Bible Christian Society that I now run, is so much hers as it is mine. Roll the tape again forward a couple more years to 1995. I left the banking industry in September of 95 to become the business manager for a Salesian ministry in Birmingham called the Be an Apostle of Christ Foundation. It was a ministry aimed at serving the poor, particularly the children of the poor, on the east side of Birmingham. So here I was, getting back to what God had started in me years before, and working for and with the poor. One morning in November of '96, while still working with this Salesian ministry, I needed to go down the road to the post office for some stamps. The drive from my workplace to the post office took less than 3 minutes. Normally, when I was in the car at that time, I would pop in a Scott Hahn tape. I was still learning all I could about the faith. But in 3 minutes, if you ever hear a Scott Hahn tape, you can't digest anything of his in 3 minutes. You're just starting to hit the rewind button. So I said, well, I won't listen to a tape. Maybe I can get one good song on the radio before I make it to the post office. I had 5 secular stations programmed into my radio. There was a big Christian station in town, but I never listened to them, didn't listen to Christian music. It was an evangelical station. So each one of these secular stations I plug into, each one of them had a commercial on. So I said, well, I'll tune it into this Christian station. Maybe they have one good song that I can listen to. I'm literally almost starting to pull into the post office at that time. So I turned to the Christian station, and I had no idea that they only played paid programming in the morning. No music. What I tuned into was a program from a group called the Christian Jew Foundation. They're out of Texas. A man was talking about something, but since it wasn't music, I didn't pay much attention to what he was saying. I proceeded to park the car, and just as I was opening the door and turning the key in the ignition, I heard the phrase come out of the radio, "The whore of Babylon." I thought to myself, oh no, I hope he's not going to go where I think he's going to go. I quickly turned the key back to the opposite, literally had the door open, one foot on the pavement, key turned back on to the ignition. I heard this from the radio. This end-time political religious system of the Antichrist, which is the whore of Babylon, spoken of in Revelation 17, sits on 7 hills. I thought to myself, don't go there. It can only mean one thing. Rome. Rome. Rome is the city on 7 hills. This end-time political religious system of the Antichrist will be headquartered in Rome. So here is the identification of the whore of Babylon from Revelation 17. It is an end-time religious political system predominantly characterized as Roman Catholicism. That's all we have time for today. Tune in tomorrow when our program continues. I just went, ah! He went there. I could not believe what I just heard coming from my radio. I finished my business at the post office, and as soon as I got back to my office, I called the radio station to complain. The receptionist connected me with the program manager. His name was Wayne. I said, Wayne, I just heard the end of a program. I mean, literally, I heard the last maybe 60 seconds of that program. So I just heard the end of this program, and I have to tell you that it was offensive to me as a Catholic. To proclaim the Catholic Church as the end-time religious political system that the Antichrist will use to take over the world is going a little bit too far. And he said, well, we've got a lot of Catholic listeners, and we don't want to do anything to offend them. Yeah, right. I asked him how long that program was, since, again, I'd only heard the last 45, 60 seconds of it. He told me it had been a 15-minute program. I asked him if it wouldn't be fair to have a Catholic come on the air for 15 minutes to present an opposing point of view. He got excited about that idea. He said that he thought that would be very fair, and he acted, again, very excited about it. He said he would have to talk to his station manager about that and get back to me, and then he hung up. And I thought to myself, cool. That was nice. He's going to think about it, he's going to talk to his station manager, and he's going to get back to me. But then I realized he never took my name or phone number. It dawned on me that maybe he wasn't taking my suggestion too seriously. The next day, I purposely listened to the station at the same time to see what I would hear. Sure enough, it was more of the same, another 15 minutes of Catholic bashing. This time I took down the number of the Christian Jew Foundation, and I called them and ordered this tape series that they were playing. Turns out it was approximately 2.5 hours of almost total Catholic bashing. And all of it was aired by this Christian radio station. Needless to say, I was a bit put out by all this, so I resolved to do something about it. I decided to write the station a letter. As I was signing my name to this letter, where I'd written saying, I'd like to work with you to counter these spurious charges that have aired on your station, as I'm signing my name to it, I realized that they probably didn't care who John Martinoni was, so I decided to do something that I thought might get their attention. I made up an organization called the Bible Christian Society, and I made myself the president. I then wrote the program manager as John Martinoni, president of the Bible Christian Society. And again, this letter was a relatively calm one, in which I simply complained about the anti-Catholic bigotry, the shoddy scripture scholarship, and shoddy historical scholarship of the program in question. I asked them if they would allow neo-Nazis to air anti-Jewish programming, or if they would allow the Ku Klux Klan to air anti-African American programming. If not, I asked, then why do you allow anti-Catholics to air their particular form of bigotry? I offered to work with them to develop some sort of appropriate response to counter the anti-Catholic bigotry aired by their station. I received no response. A few weeks later, again, having received no response from the station, and now with 25 to 30 people who wanted to be members of my non-existent organization, I wrote them another letter. In it, I said that since the station had not replied to my first letter, that I must assume that they agree with the contents of the program they aired, and therefore we at the Bible Christian Society would have to take unilateral action to counter this anti-Catholic bigotry. This action could include notifying the Federal Communications Commission, boycotting the station and its sponsors, and I let them know that I was indeed compiling a list of sponsors. I had written down 2. And it could even include picketing that station. And of course, I told them that the newspapers and television would have to be notified in that event. I mailed that letter on a Monday morning. Tuesday afternoon, I received a call from the station. It was Wayne, the program manager. At first, he tried to mollify me by claiming that the station could not be held responsible for the content of every one of its programs. These programs, said Wayne, did not originate with their station. Their station was paid to air them, and they had no editorial control over program content. Well, that was a pretty weak argument as far as I was concerned. So I began to push the issue of giving a Catholic some airtime to answer the lies, distortions, and half-truths in the offending program. He offered half an hour. I mentioned to him that the Christian Jew Foundation had had 2.5 hours, and that having 2.5 hours seemed eminently fair to me. I heard a little muffled conversation at the other end of the phone, and he said, "We'll give you an hour." I said, "I'll take it." We settled on 1 hour on their daily afternoon call-in talk show. This was to be 1 hour for a Catholic to explain and defend the Catholic Church. Having never done anything like that before, I immediately sent for the cavalry. At EWTN, you're familiar with EWTN, Mother Angelica? They had a gentleman named Jeff Cavins who had their Thursday night program, Life on the Rock. He was living in Birmingham at the time, so I called and said, "Jeff, would you come on this program with me?" And he was very gracious and said, "Absolutely." Well, we were able to create quite a stir. 2 Catholics talking on evangelical Protestant radio for what ended up to be an hour and a half. The calls we got, we were called some things. But I focused on explaining the Catholic doctrines such as confession and purgatory from Scripture. I narrow focus. Jeff did big picture, like tradition and sola fide, faith alone versus faith and works and things like that. He was incredible. After the program, the station received a number of calls. I mean, a lot of calls about the show. And since the only contact they had was me, they gave all the callers my home phone number. So I started getting calls from all these folks, Catholic and non-Catholic, all of whom, 100% of whom, even the non-Catholics, were thanking us for doing that show. And could we do more? And I said, no, we can't do more. It's not our radio station. I thought maybe by doing this one program, the station would know that there's this hard-headed Catholic out there and they won't play that stuff again until the very next day. So we had all these people calling, wanting more. A couple days later, I had a gentleman called from a very wealthy family in Birmingham. And he said, "John," he said, "I will pay for you to buy airtime on that radio station if you do a show." And at first I thought, they loved me. You know, I was great. Yeah. But then after sleeping on it overnight, I said, I don't know enough about my faith to do this. I don't know anything about radio, so I ignored it. In fact, I told God, I said, "God, this is such a crazy and ridiculous idea that I am not even going to pray about it." That's how ludicrous it was to me. I said, "If you want this to happen, God, you're going to have to kick me in the tail and make it very clear to me that you want this to happen." Lesson in life. Don't ever tell God that He's going to have to kick you in the tail to get you to do something. He will, and sometimes it hurts. Anyway, about 7 months after being on that radio show, I found myself in the office of the station's sales manager signing a 1-year contract to do a weekly live call-in talk show. That was January of 1998. I was screamed at. I was called an abomination, a heretic, a number of other things. But I had a program on Protestant radio doing Catholic apologetics. Half the callers were Protestant, half were Catholic. Most of them were very favorable to what we were doing. Because all I said every week, all I said is, I don't care if you disagree with what I believe, but please disagree with what I really believe. Don't think I worship Mary. Don't think I worship statues. Don't think that we re-crucify Jesus at every Mass. That is not what we believe. If you want to disagree with me, fine. I can handle that. And we can talk as adult, mature Christians and discuss our differences. But don't tell me that I believe things that I don't believe. This show was all about explaining the Catholic faith from the Catholic perspective, which many of them had never heard, many of the listeners had never heard before. All they had ever been told about Catholics were from non-Catholics. So it was a very good opportunity that came about as a result of what was a vicious attack on the Catholic faith. So that's why I always tell people, never look at questions about your faith or even attacks on your faith as a bad thing. View them as opportunities. Look at it as God opening the door for you to enlighten this person, to bring a little truth into this person's thinking and into their lives. Again, I was called a heretic. This guy was screaming at the second show, screaming, "You abomination!" It's kind of fun, actually. I went off the air a year later, but 7 months after I went off the air, the interest that had been stirred in the Catholic community by that program, and again, it's not me, this is God working, because I didn't know what I was doing. The interest stirred by that program led to a Catholic radio station coming to Birmingham about 7 months after I went off the air in February of 99. Catholic radio started in September of 99. And I became the station manager of the Catholic station and did that for a little over 3 years. But because of the Bible Christian Hour, I started getting requests to give talks on apologetics. The Knights of Columbus called. The Sarah Club called. My parish asked me to do a series of talks during the summer of, I think it was 99. Summer of 99, which folks at this parish heard, which is why I'm here today. I'm here today because I heard 60 seconds of an anti-Catholic program on Protestant radio. That's how God works. Changed my life. That series that I did in the summer of 99 was recorded and picked up by EWTN Radio. EWTN began airing it in January of 2000, and all of a sudden I was getting calls for tapes, calls to come talk at our parish here in Florida, California, Texas. It was unbelievable. I was like, this is nuts. People want to hear me talk. People want to hear my tapes. All of a sudden I had a tape ministry. Didn't even know what that was before. But the number of tapes I shipped out kept growing. In 2000, first year of shipping any tapes, we shipped about 2,000 tapes. The next year, 2001, we shipped 3,000 tapes. Last year it was 9,000 tapes. This year so far it's close to 16,000 tapes to all 50 states and over 13 foreign countries. It has been unbelievable, the work that God can do in a person's life, in my life. Between the apologetics work and the station manager's job, I was essentially working 2 jobs. And in April of 2002, my third child, Ethan, was born. So I had a 5-year-old son, Brennan, 2-year-old daughter, McKenna, and a newborn son. I started praying to God to let me know if I should stay at the radio or go full-time with the Bible Christian Society. So what had started out as a tongue-in-cheek imaginary organization had grown into something very real that was keeping me very busy. And it soon became obvious to me that I was supposed to be out on my own. So as of January 1st of this year, 2003, I started full-time as the president and chief apologist of the Bible Christian Society. And I get to call myself the chief apologist because I'm the only apologist. I guess I need to end this talk here, but I just want to say in closing that while not everyone is intended to be a full-time apologist, every single one of you, sitting there right now, and anyone who hears this tape, all of you can do apologetics at some level. Everyone, all of you, through apologetics, can make an impact on the faith journey of others as well as your own. Apologetics, again, is not a be-all and end-all, but it is a valuable tool, a valuable weapon that all of us as Catholics need to have in our arsenals. You know, when I first came back into the church, I had this notion in my head that holiness, this holiness stuff, well, that's for priests, and nuns, people who have the time to be holy. Well, I've since learned that I am, as are all of us, called to holiness, no matter what our station in life. After getting involved in apologetics, I've sometimes gotten the idea from folks that they think apologetics is only for former Protestant ministers. Folks who really know the Bible, not us Catholics. Well, I hope if any of you feel that way, that you can't do apologetics, I hope that this talk will maybe in some little way disabuse you of that notion. You see, God calls all of us to be ready to defend our faith. 1 Peter 3 verse 15, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is in you. Always be prepared, God says. Apologetics is one tool that each and every one of us can use in order to always be prepared. I want you to have the confidence that you can do this stuff. Each day I hear from more and more average folks just like you and me. I hear from businessmen and businesswomen. I hear from students. I hear from housewives. I hear from grandmothers and grandfathers, all of whom are learning a little bit about apologetics. And as a result, all of these folks are going out and evangelizing, sometimes in little ways, other times in big ways, but they're going out and they are evangelizing non-Catholics as well as fallen away Catholics as well as church-going Catholics. And these folks are bringing people back into the church. Look, folks, I tell you, if I can do this stuff, you can do this stuff. You've heard maybe the story of Balaam in the Old Testament. He was a prophet who set out one day to curse the Israelites, but God sent an angel to stop him. Balaam couldn't see this angel with this fiery sword that was getting ready to strike him down, but his donkey that he was riding on could see the angel. Only because of his donkey was Balaam saved. His donkey actually spoke to Balaam. A talking donkey. I know with 100% certainty that story is true. I know it because you are looking at living proof that God can make a donkey talk. The crowd here, you may not remember this phrase about Greece being the word, the play Grease, the movie Grease. Grease is the word, that refrain, Grease is the word, is the word. Grease is not the word. Apologetics is the word. If I can do it, you can do it. And come the next 3 nights and learn a little bit more, and you'll be surprised what you're going to be able to do. Thank you. For more information or to obtain a copy of this talk, please check out the Bible Christian Society website at www.BibleChristianSociety.com or send a letter to the Bible Christian Society, P.O. Box 424, Pleasant Grove, Alabama, 35127. Thank you, and may God bless you.